what if all of DreamWorks movies were actually part of the same timeline? What if all of these crazy worlds were actually one world? Well, loyal theorists, I figured out a way to do it, and today I'll show you how the B movie is the key to this whole timeline. Hello Internet, welcome to Film Theory, the show where it's okay to keep your head in the clouds, because today we're diving back into the DreamWorks universe. Yeah, so last year we did what is probably one of my favorite theories ever, taking all of Disney's animated movies and getting them to work together in a single timeline in what we called the Disney theory. This was inspired by similar theorists who have done the same with Disney's sister studio Pixar in the Pixar theory. This was so much fun, and I wanted to do the same with the DreamWorks film catalog, and last time we got all the way up to the films set right before the year 2000. And today, my friends, we are gonna finish what we started. So just in case you need a bit of a refresher of how we're doing this, well, we've created sort of tiers of canon for DreamWorks. Everything that we see in one of their main animated films created by their main animation studio, that stuff is canon, and we have to figure out how to make it work. Right below that, we're gonna be looking at the direct-to-home video sequels or television series if we need more clues to help place these films on the timeline. However, to be clear, we aren't counting every series because, well, DreamWorks has made a lot of animated shows, and some for other franchises like Jurassic Park and Fast and Furious. Yeah, like, we're pretty good, but that ain't fitting in here, man. And lastly, at the bottom tier here, we're gonna be using other supplemental material like video games, marketing, commercials, trailers, books, etc. if we need even more information to fit something in. Oh, and also last time, because I promised you an answer, I asked you who you thought would win in a fight between Shrek, Toothless, and Poe, and you guys delivered. For real, this was one of my most commented on theories ever, and let's just say a clear winner emerged. And it wasn't Shrek, because our boy only got 7% of the votes. And you know what? That's kind of fair. We kind of put him up against two other massive heavyweights here. And the race between Toothless and Poe was close, but with nearly 50% of the vote, Poe ended up eking out the win. Yeah, I guess when you can banish someone's spirit by twisting their finger, that kind of gives you a leg up in this sort of competition, huh? After a showdown like that, I think these three DreamWorks dynamos might need some medical attention, though I'm not exactly sure how they'd track down a specialist for like a dragon or anthropomorphic panda, but I do know it would be easier with the sponsor of today's theory, ZocDoc. Real talk, have you ever like pulled a muscle, broken a bone, or just felt like a strange symptom and not really known what to do next? It can be confusing, scary, and overwhelming, but you don't need to wait for a miracle from the boy in the moon or to sign a contract with Rumpelstiltskin to fix all those problems. Instead, you can just use ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free website that helps you find and book high-quality, in-network doctors so you can find a professional you love without having to call a single office. To be clear, they aren't giving you the care themselves. They're connecting you with more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states. Whether you're looking for skin care, dental care, primary care, or eye care, you can easily search by specialty or symptom to find the care that's right for you. Like, for example, I've needed to get new glasses for, several years now, and ZocDoc actually helped me track down a great specialist to get what I needed. You can filter by who accepts your insurance, how close they are to you, and by ratings from other patients. And when you're ready, you can see their real-time availability and click to book instantly. And appointments made through ZocDoc happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and sometimes you can even score same-day appointments. So if you want to stop putting off appointments here in this new year and get the care you need from real professionals, go to ZocDoc.com/thefilmtheorists or click the link in the description to book an appointment with a provider who will listen, understand, and support you. Thanks again to ZocDoc for sponsoring this theory. And with that, let's jump back in to the DreamWorks theory. Now, before we leave the 1900s, an important event happens that we can't quite put an exact date on, but becomes very important later on. Across the universe in the Glaupunkt quadrant, a solar system is being eaten up by a black hole. Two of the planets in the solar system were inhabited by alien species, both of which sent out one infant in an escape pod, hurtling towards Earth. One landed in the home of a loving family, while the other landed in a prison to be raised by the inmates. teammates. These two would eventually become Metro Man and Megamind, but we'll get back to that later. Like I said, it's difficult to date this exactly because time gets funky with space travel. It could have happened at basically any point in this century or earlier, but based on things we'll learn later, they likely landed on Earth at some point in the 1990s. So it's here with the turn of the new millennium where we come to what might be the most pivotal movie in the entire DreamWorks universe, the Bee Movie. Yes, loyal theorists, I am completely serious when I say that the Bee Movie is one of, if not the most important film to this timeline, a movie whose very own name is a joke about it being kinda mid. But why is this one so important? Well, it's because the Bee Movie is where we see the relationship between the humans and the animal kingdom truly shift. See, the central storyline of the Bee Movie shows us that bees, and apparently many other animals, have the ability to speak to humans. Most either just don't bother to do so, or have lost their knowledge of human languages over the centuries after the persecution of those talking animals started back all the way in Shrek times. This is how we can have animals like the characters of Madagascar speak to and understand each other, but not the humans. And eventually, widespread knowledge of these talking animals was either just lost or people didn't believe it. They considered it legends of the past. But everything is upended thanks to Barry B. Benson, who lets the cat out of the bag when he ventures out of his hive and into the human world. But when he speaks to the people out here, he learns a hard lesson about why the bees and other animals aren't enjoying friendly chats with the humans. Yeah, he discovers that the humans have been exploiting the bees and stealing their honey, another example in a long line of human abuse towards these animals. But Barry decides to do the most American thing he can think of here. He sues somebody. Yeah, he organizes a class action lawsuit to protect the bees and reveals the existence of these talking animals to the wider public, which also ends up almost destroying the world by not pollinating all the plants. Listen guys, this movie is strange. Anyway, that class action lawsuit is actually what lets us place this massively important film on our timeline. Like most other class action lawsuits, the one in this film takes a few years to actually run its course, and we see a montage showing media coverage with dates ranging from 2004 to 2007. So easy peasy, the film takes place in the mid-2000s, and by the end of the film, Barry decides to use the lawsuit as a jumping off point to establish a law firm to help other exploited animal species fight for their rights. And unfortunately, the other critters are gonna be needing the help if they want to rejoin human society. See, just like in the real world, change often takes a lot of time, especially with huge revelations like the fact that at least some animals are actually sentient. Some humans won't have heard of this, others just won't care, and even then, some animals will probably fit in better than others, like the bees who already work under a pretty human social system.
We know that you as a bee have worked your whole life to get to the point where you can work for your whole life.
That hits close to home. And we see how that can impact the animals in movies like Over the Hedge, where a group of woodland critters deal with complex issues like a lack of food and humans moving into their environment, trying to keep them out of their homes by building giant hedge walls. This film actually takes place during the Bee Movie, and we know that thanks to another car of all things. Yeah, we get a look at the pest control guy's license plate, which expires in April of 2007. If he renewed it for the next year, that would place this film in March of 2006, the year of the film's release. This is actually supported by the movie's video game tie-in, which is a sequel to the movie set 1 year later. In the game, they mentioned that the next year will be a leap year. 2008 was a leap year, so the game takes place in 2007 and the movie in 2006. Anyway, something similar happens across the world in a subterranean society beneath the streets of London in Flushed Away. Here, we see the ignorance of some humans firsthand, when a rat named Roddy is forced to live as a pet to a human who doesn't even notice when another rat takes his place. That's just brutal. Now, placing this one on the timeline was a bit difficult because it had a few red herrings with a bunch of calendars that don't really make much sense with the facts that we know that this movie takes place between June and July. But fortunately for us, we do have some other context clues that we can use here. See, the film actually revolves around the FIFA World Cup Championship game, which takes place in Berlin. And as it turns out, Berlin hosted the World Cup in 2006, the year of the film's release, so yeah, it passes the sniff check, so we're putting this one in the summer of 2006. Which, as it turns out, was a very busy year for the DreamWorks universe and its animal inhabitants, because that's also when Shark Tale takes place. Man, this film was always just, it hit the uncanny valley for me, and I did not like it. Anyway, this one was just a little bit tricky to place. We know that Oscar owns various electronics.
I got my 60-inch high-def flat-screen TV with 6 speakers surround, CD, DVD, PlayStation.
And at first, I wondered if this might take place a little bit later in the timeline, when there'd been enough time for the companies making those things to move into the ocean to sell to the sharks. But that just didn't quite sit right with me. Like, opening in a new market like that can be a super time-consuming process. And it's entirely possible that they got these electronics through like misplaced cargo or something like that. But this is still valuable to give us a time frame of the mid-2000s. And thankfully, we still get an idea of when this takes place, thanks to a mid-movie montage. This lists November on various publications, and we see that Oscar's boss has a calendar on his desk with a 30-day month, with the first on a Wednesday. November 1st fell on a Wednesday in the year of 2006, so that's what we're gonna go with. And alright, that was a lot to figure out, but honestly, Shark Tale never really hit with me, so I'm glad to move on. But these next films, man, they are absolute classics. We're of course talking about the Madagascar films, telling the story of animals once held in captivity at the Central Park Zoo before finding their way to the island of Madagascar and a taste of freedom. So these movies present a bit of a problem for us. Based on what we found, they almost certainly take place after the bee movie, but these animals aren't treated as sentient like the bees are. But thankfully, this does still make sense. See, along with it just taking a long time for real change to be made at this scale in a society, we also see that the humans straight up do not understand the main characters of Madagascar. They only hear like roars or grunts or other animal noises.
Hello?
I guess these animals never picked up human language despite living in the Big Apple for just forever. So what we're gonna say is happening here is that society just hasn't quite understood that these animals are sentient and deserve their own rights like the bees do. But all of that said, how can we place these movies on the timeline? Well, there's a newspaper in Madagascar too that says that Alex was found as a lion cub on Wednesday, April 8th. So big help right there, right? Wrong.
What is wrong with you?
The big problem here is that this paper is dated for 1972, and that's just not accurate. We see then modern fashion for the 2000s and desktop computers common during that decade throughout the movie. The 70s, or even a decade after that, just does not fit at all. So we'll have to chalk this up to an intern getting the print date wrong at this paper. But this can still help us pinpoint an accurate date. We know from the first movie that the Madagascar gang has been at the zoo for about a decade, since Marty the zebra is celebrating his 10th birthday and Alex has gotten him a gift for every year. And there's even a spin-off prequel series that confirms that timeline. So, if we work backwards from the fashion and technology we see in the movie and go back 10 years, was there a date in the 90s that would line up with a Wednesday, April 8th? Yes, sirree. 1998 was another year where April 8th fell on a Wednesday. If Alex has gotten Marty a gift 10 years in a row, including 1998, that would land us in 2007. And just because we can, that can even be narrowed down even further to November, since Marty usually sets these gifts aside and then doesn't touch them enough that they gather dust. And one of those gifts was another calendar opened to November. Based on the dates here, we can even say that this calendar was for 2002. Listen, me and the team did a lot of work figuring this out. I want to give them their cookies on this. And if all of that wasn't enough evidence to convince you that this is the date, well, listen to this.
Knicks lost again.
That's referring to the New York Knicks, a professional basketball team that had a notoriously rotten season in 2007. It just all fits, man. So, okay, that's the first film down. What about the sequels? Well, this is thankfully a bit easier. So, at the start of Madagascar 3, we see that Alex has been keeping a tally of days that he started at the end of the second movie, going back 675 days. We know exactly when the third movie takes place thanks to a date we explicitly see on a contract. So, using that, we can work out that Madagascar 2 takes place around July and August of 2010, and then Madagascar 3 is in June of 2012. And with that, I'd also like to leave you with the fact that lions and giraffes rarely live past 20 to 25 years old, if that long. So, yeah, Alex and Melman are probably no longer with us. Perhaps taken in by the immortal god of death, but that's a Mort theory for another day. All right, oh my gosh, that was like an entire page of the script spent on the Madagascar films. Can we get to something easier next? Well, ish? Because next up is Rise of the Guardians. So while this wasn't a huge box office hit, it is very important for our DreamWorks universe here. See, while the last several entries really taught us about the relationship between humans and talking animals, this movie explores the more supernatural elements of the universe. Now, the movie is fairly ambiguous about its exact time frame, and it feels like it could be anywhere between the 1980s and 2010s. But there's a crucial element that helps us cement the film's date. Near the start of the movie, we hear that researchers are analyzing fur that allegedly came from a Bigfoot.
It says here that they found Bigfoot hair samples and DNA.
And as it turns out, there was a lot of buzz about this exact thing IRL in a study that examined DNA from fur samples collected from numerous Bigfoot sightings. Using that info, other things also fall into place. The movie takes place in the days leading up to Easter. In 2013, this would have been towards the end of March, and these Bigfoot studies were published in February of 2013, leading into that timeline. Like, it lines up too well to just be a coincidence, letting us confidently place this movie in the March of 2013. Oh, and hey, fun fact, but did you know that the date of Easter every year is determined by something pretty specific? The cycles of the moon. Easter always takes place on the first full moon after the spring equinox. That in and of itself would be a fun coincidence linking back to the moon entity, but it goes even further than that. See, children in this film who believe in supernatural forces or guardians like Santa, the Easter Bunny, the Sandman, the Tooth Fairy, and the like, they are protected by those guardians' powers, and they're always strongest at night.
For as long as they believe in us, we will guard them with our lives.
And while I don't want to go too deep into the book series that inspired this movie, The Guardians of Childhood, well, this was just too much not to mention. According to the books, the very first guardian is known as the Man in the Moon, or Tsar Lunar, and he basically is the leader of the group. And the movie gives us every visual indication that the same is true here. The moon not only lights up their path as they carry out their nighttime wonders they use to enchant and protect children, but the movie even implies that the moon is the source of their supernatural powers or the magic. Like, man, come on!
You were chosen, like we were all chosen by Man and Moon.
So, okay, with all that said, next up we jump from this epic about saving childhood and dreams to Turbo, a flick about a snail named Theo that dreams of making it big in the Indy 500.
No dream is too big, and no dreamer
Too small.
Man, DreamWorks truly has a breadth of titles. So we can go ahead and put Turbo in the month of May, since the Indy 500 takes place on Memorial Day weekend every year. We then see a calendar in the background of one scene, and the first day lines up with May of 2013, the year that Turbo came out. Easy enough. But that isn't the only thing that takes place in 2013. Next up we have Mr. Peabody in Sherman. We can get this date thanks to a newspaper article talking about Mr. Peabody adopting Sherman, dated July 20th, 2006. Funnily enough, this would have been right in the midst of the animal rights revolution spurred on by the B-movie's trial. And we even see Mr. Peabody argue his case before a judge for why he should be allowed to adopt Sherman. Anyway, in the movie, we know that Mr. Peabody has been raising Sherman for 7 years.
I've spent the last 7 years teaching Sherman good judgment.
Which would land us in 2013. And we also see Sherman enroll in a new school, so that lets us narrow this down even further to August or September of that year. But the craziest bit of evidence here to really let us nail down an exact month? Well, much of the movie's climax takes place at Grand Army Plaza, which we can identify thanks to the William Tecumseh Sherman Monument in the background. And when the presidents of the past step forward to offer Mr. Peabody a presidential pardon, Bill Clinton also suddenly appears and says that he's also done worse.
I've done worse.
No comment on that. But here's the thing, I don't believe that this is the Bill Clinton of the past. This is actually supposed to be the present day Bill Clinton of 2013, and we have proof that he would have been here at the same time as the movie. See, in September of 2013, the Clinton Global Initiative was hosting its annual meeting just a few blocks from Grand Army Plaza at the Sheraton New York Times Square Hotel. That would put Bill Clinton in the exact neighborhood at the exact time he would need to insert himself into this conversation. Just talk about a crazy accurate Easter egg, man. So this is another case where we don't have the exact timeline where this would need to happen, but at some point between the late 2000s and mid-2010s, amongst all the talk of sentient animals and their battle for civil rights, the DreamWorks universe gets a lot weirder as an honest-to-God superhero and supervillain emerge in the fictional metropolis of Metro City. Their names are Metro Man and Megamind, and, you know, in a world with talking bees and panda martial artists, it's not the weirdest thing you'll ever see. Okay, still with me? Great, because next up we have another classic, The Penguins of Madagascar. So this one opens with the penguins still chilling with the Madagascar crew at the traveling circus 2 years after Madagascar 3. As we've already stated, that took place in 2012, putting this movie in 2014. This also lines up with the news bumper reading "The cutest girl of 2014 has been chosen," and we see shots of New York's Freedom Tower, which was completed in 2014. The film also released in that year, so hey, we love when they make it easy. Notably, this movie is also set 10 years after the trial from the B-movie began, and we see animals slowly take on more active roles in human society, including an octopus masquerading as a human in the business world and an animal-based special agent team charged with saving the day. I'm seriously just shocked at how well all of this ended up lining up. Speaking of heroic, next up we have Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. Now, you might be scratching your head here, thinking that a lot of the old computers and television sets we see in Captain Underpants seem to be more consistent with the early aughts. And well, to that I say, remember that this is a school in America. They're likely gonna have some outdated equipment, trust me. And that's especially true when the schools have budget issues like Jerome Horwitz Elementary.
Door lock activated.
That's an expensive door.
It was a choice between the magnetic automatic door closer and the music and arts program.
But while those things might be outdated, something in this film that is up to date that lets us place it, the periodic table of elements. See, scientists didn't actually fill out the 7th row of the periodic table until 2006. And then it took like another decade for a few of those final elements to get their proper names like we see here in the movie. From here, we can see that element 118, Oganesson, hasn't yet been given its official name. It got its name in 2016, so basically this movie has to take place during the first half of the decade. What's more, we see that on Professor Pippi Pee Diarrhea Stein Poopy Pants Esquire's resume that his birthday is April 1st, 1953. He looks roughly to be in his 60s, so again, that places this movie sometime after 2012. And finally, in Principal Krupp's office, we see a calendar that aligns with the 2015-2016 academic year. And given the autumn leaves we see throughout the film, we're placing this one in the fall of 2015. But before we can move on here, we also have to talk about Dogman. See, we actually can't put this one on our timeline, at least in a traditional sense. Why? Because it's a comic book dreamed up by George and Harold from Captain Underpants. So this is a story within a story. Just for simplicity's sake, we're gonna lump this one in with Captain Underpants. Though I do have to point out, a lot of animals are referenced as people in these comics. Think like Petey the cat. So I have to wonder if these two were influenced by the talking animals revealing themselves after the bees went public. Which actually works well with our story here. See, as the years go by and we start to go on a decade of these talking animals revealing themselves, the more and more normalized they become, until we get to the point where some animals find themselves on the wrong side of the law. Yeah, we're talking about The Bad Guys, and its sequel, The Bad Guys 2. So dating this one actually requires us to work backwards a little bit. A background calendar in the sequel shows us the month of June starting on a Friday, consistent with dates in Snake's planner and the dates of the heists. In the same movie, Diane, the governor of California in the film, is surrounded by re-election posters. And if this is an election year for the governor of California, then the only June that makes sense is the June of 2018. At the end of the first film, we know that the bad guys got released from prison around Snake's birthday. A mugshot confirms that Snake's birthday is July 2nd, so that means that the first film ended in July of 2017. And since the bad guys were imprisoned for about a year, that means that the first film mainly took place during July of 2016. That makes sense? Now, the only issue with this is a security camera feed showing September 7th, 2021, but thankfully this system is clearly off in some way. Like, we know that the film starts in July because of Snake's birthday, and there's no way that the sky is going to be this dark in LA at 4:30 at this time of year. So what happened? Did someone just like really mess up the system when they were setting it up or something? Well, thankfully, we even have an explanation for this. The movie shows us a meteorite crashing into LA, which scrambles the camera that's recording the impact. So it's possible it interfered with other cameras too. Oh, and just before we move on, this glowing butt-shaped meteor?
It's not a bat!
Well, it's another space rock that has the ability to mess with the minds of animals, which the villain uses to mind control a swarm of guinea pigs to do his evil bidding. It's just more evidence that space rocks and celestial bodies have some sort of magical powers in the DreamWorks universe. Now, next up, there's the Boss Baby Family Business. Yeah, we learn here that baby Tina was born on March 31st, 2017, so Family Business takes place around the winter or holiday season of that same year. And also, just because it lines up too well, if you zoom in on a license plate in this film, you can barely make out that the year on the registration sticker is 2021. Now, at first, that doesn't make much sense with what we see elsewhere in the movie, since most states only offer one-year vehicle registrations. But
once again, it's not about.
In the animated series spin-off, Boss Baby Back in Business, there are hints that the Templeton family is based out of Toledo, Ohio, a state that offers the option for multi-year vehicle registrations going as high as 5 years. So they could have had a 2021 sticker even in 2017. It just lines up perfectly. And from talking babies, now we need to move over to something a bit more mystical, abominable even. Yeah, this one flew under the radar for me when it first came out, but it's really cute. I love projects like this that let us rediscover these sorts of movies. Anyway, in the background of the protagonist's apartment, we see a calendar depicting the month of June that aligns with 2019, the year of the film's release. Everything else also aligns aesthetically with a late 2010s sort of movie, so we're just gonna go with that. Only other thing really worth noting here is that we have another magical mythical creature, the Yeti named Everest. And like so many other things in this universe, Everest's magic seems to have a celestial source. It glows a lovely shade of blue and almost looks like the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights, so neat. Alright, so here's where things get a little bit weird. Well, weirder than it has been. Because next up we have the story of Megamind and his redemption from a supervillain into a true hero. So how exactly are we placing this, and why is it so late in the timeline when this movie came out in like 2010? Well, in the first battle with Titan, we see a calendar that shows the month of June, with dates matching up with 2008, 2014, and 2025. Now, originally, I'm betting that the filmmakers intended for this to be set in the June of 2008, especially since we see a lot of posters parodying Obama's iconic 2008 presidential campaign. However, in the direct-to-streaming sequel, Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, the characters say that the events of that movie happen within just days of the first.
It's something the old evil me would have done way back in the day.
Sir, way back in the day was just 2 days ago.
Which is extra funny because the short Megamind, the Button of Doom, is set just 1 day after the first movie. It must have been a busy week. Anyway, Doom Syndicate firmly sets the Megamind story in the age of smartphones and modern social media influencers. There's even a joke about Megamind being out of step with smartphones, probably explaining why he could barely operate an old school phone in the first movie.
Hello.
Either way, because of all of that, we have to slot Megamind in the June of 2025. Okay, so superheroes exist in this universe now, and they're aliens. Again, it's interesting that things from space have powers beyond our normal world, huh? Anyway, this world continues to get weird, but things can get weirder thanks to Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. This is one of those strange films that is sort of a collision of the talking animal aspect of the universe and the mythical aspects. Because, well, Krakens aren't really a real animal, they're legendary sea monsters. So how are we placing this one? Well, there's a calendar right here at the start of the movie that depicts either May of 2018 or 2029. Given the fact that we know that the Gilman family has been living on land for 15 years, we're gonna go with that May of 2029 date. Why do I say that? Well, do you know what happened 15 years prior to 2029 in our timeline? The penguins of Madagascar, where the villain octopus demonstrated that sea creatures could successfully integrate amongst human society without raising suspicion. This made the Gilman family believe that they could do the same, passing for human and building a life on land while the talking animals fought for equality in the world. But while that's important, low-key, something else huge here in this movie movie? Ruby herself, beginning her new life as a giant monster fighting other giant monsters to protect her home. In fact, she proved quite effective at this, enough so that she would have drawn the attention of the US military, who would absolutely want their own giant monsters. And that, loyal theorists, brings us to Monsters vs. Aliens. So this one is gonna have a bit of a time jump, the biggest one we've seen so far in the modern day, all the way up to the summer of 2044. Now that might seem random, but we actually have some very specific information to thank for this. In the backstory of one of the monster characters, Bob is said to have been the result of scientific experimentation on genetically modified tomatoes.
A genetically altered tomato was combined with a chemically altered ranch-flavored dessert topping at a snack food plant.
Why is that significant? Well, the first GMO tomatoes went to market in 1994, so we're going to use that as roughly the start date of Bob's experimentation. Secondly, Bob says that he's been imprisoned by the government for 50 years.
I haven't been outside in 50 years. It's amazing out here.
50 years after 1994 would be 2044, giving us our date. Oh, and just the cherry on top here, but in the film's opening sequence, we see a calendar showing us the month of June, and it lines up perfectly with June 2044. So Monsters vs. Aliens provides us with some other interesting bits of lore for the timeline. First off, just like so many of the other films, this story involves a rock from space, the Quantonium, which the villain uses for its almost supernatural abilities. It powers a clone army and also allows Susan to grow in power as she channels its energy. She grows in size, gains super strength, and her hair turns white. Very similar to the sort of effect we see with Jack Frost when he's revived from the dead and given ice powers by the moon. Secondly, it also gives us an explanation for why all of the mythological elements of the fairy tale creatures faded from the memory of the general population, despite talking animals and superheroes and aliens becoming a part of everyday life. See, the government buried the evidence of these sorts of monsters after the 1950s, hoping to keep their populations calm. Oh, and also, because it is relevant in a little bit, I should note that this film features the destruction of the Golden Gate Bridge, but in a post-credit scene, the president and his administration discuss rebuilding the city. He also inadvertently launches like all of the nukes the US has, but thankfully some safeguards must have been in place since this was averted. Otherwise, the Nickelodeon spin-off TV series couldn't have happened, and we'd have to end things right here, and that's no fun. Anyway, next up is Orion and the Dark. This was a sweet little movie, but like Dogman, the events we see in the film aren't actually what happens. Otherwise, this would be slotting in all the way back in the May of 1995, which we see on a dated permission slip. No, see, the main story is actually entirely made up. It's a bedtime story that the main protagonist, Orion, is telling his daughter about when he was afraid of the dark. But also, this is another bit of sleight of hand, since this is actually a story the daughter is telling her own kid about the time her father told her this story. It's bedtime storyception, not confusing at all. So the only bit of the movie that actually happened here is the framing device used in the ending scene, where the woman is telling the bedtime story to her son in a slightly futuristic house. But we can use the details of the bedtime story to figure out a rough date. See, the whole premise of the movie is that each child in each time period is approximately around the same age, 11 years old and in the 5th grade. Using that permission slip from earlier, we know that Orion was 11 in 1995. Orion's daughter travels back in time to help him, and when she returns to her own time, the machine reads September 18th, 2023. So that means that she would have been 11 and a 5th grader in 2023. That would have her graduating high school in 2031, supported by the photo we see where she has a 31 on her tassel. It took her father about 10 years after high school until he had a child, so if we were to apply the same to his daughter, well, she would have had her son in 2041, and that means that he would have been 11 in 2052, putting this scene in roughly the early 2050s. I'm not crazy for figuring that out. You're crazy for not coming with me. And speaking of crazy, let's talk home. If you don't remember this movie, it was about a race of aliens who do a friendly invasion of Earth, teleporting humans to the Australian outback while they take over the humans' homes throughout the rest of the world. Which does kind of present a little bit of a problem for us, because how are we going to explain how aliens can invade without the superheroes or monsters of Earth stopping them? Well, we have an answer thanks to the weather. See, we know that home takes place sometime in the winter, evidenced by all the snow and Christmas decorations in New York. But strangely, when the characters go to Paris, it's very green and vibrant, very different than how Paris should look around that time of year. The only explanation we have is that climate change must have affected Europe's weather enough that this would not be the case anymore. And thankfully, one study found that if things continue on as they are, Paris is projected to have the same climate as the French Mediterranean city of Montpellier around the year of 2100. I mean, not thankfully, but you know what I mean. So our date for this movie would need to be around that time. This would also give us the added bonus of taking place far enough on the timeline that the characters from Megamind, Ruby Gilman, and the Monsters vs. Aliens crew wouldn't be around to interfere with the alien invasion, having died from old age. And having this film take place after Monsters vs. Aliens also explains why people seem pretty subdued about the whole idea of an alien invasion from the extraterrestrials in Home. This isn't their first rodeo, and we are a far cry away from people screaming in the streets in Monsters vs. Aliens. But what about a more exact date? Well, we can get this thanks to a school calendar on the fridge showing the month of December. The first two numbers of the year are 2 and 0, but the other ones are covered up and a bit difficult to see. Like, if you squint, you might be able to say the third number's like a 1, which would make sense for when this movie came out, but not for everything else we see throughout the film and our timeline here. The calendar also has 2 grayed out weekday dates, likely Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, meaning that this December began on a Tuesday. If we look at all the Decembers towards the back half of the century, the one that best lines up with this would be 2092. So Home is going on our timeline in the December of 2092. Now, at the end of Home, we see aliens from many different worlds arrive on Earth to party it up, drawn in by its catchy music and stellar vibes. And one of those alien species must have been the trolls. Yeah, like the trolls as in the troll dolls. Just stick with me here, okay? That might seem a bit strange at first, but the Trolls movies don't actually take place on Earth. They're actually on their very own planet. And not only that, but we also know that the Trolls are actually a spacefaring society, since we see that the Funk Trolls have a flying saucer in the second film. So placing the Trolls movies actually just comes down to them getting access to many of Earth's banger songs. Home serves us up that opportunity on a golden platter. So we're putting the first Trolls movie right after it. Trolls World Tour a couple years later, and then finally Trolls band together a month or so after that. But after all of this contact with spacefaring civilizations, the technology on Earth continues to advance. But something that doesn't change, just how much humanity exploits the environment. Yeah, the climate change that we saw in Home just continues to get worse and worse, eventually leading us to The Wild Robot, probably my personal favorite DreamWorks movie. So what can we use to date this movie, other than it just being in a vaguely hyper-futuristic setting where technology has made massive strides with robotics? Well, the big thing here, we see that the rebuilt Golden Gate Bridge is completely underwater. Man, that bridge just cannot catch a break in this universe, huh? Anyway, believe it or not, but we can actually use this information to gauge roughly when the Wild Robot takes place. See, there's a moment where Roz is handed a pamphlet talking about Florida, advertising its new stretches of shoreline. Now, we're eyeballing this here, but if the green parts are submerged, well, then that's consistent with about 25-meter rise in the sea level, give or take. With where things currently stand, Earth is on track for a 25-meter rise in the sea level in about 1,000 years. So, using that, we're gonna date the Wild Robot to the early 3000s. But one of the most concerning things we see in this movie and how it impacts the DreamWorks timeline, well, humanity has again become very hostile towards the animals. Like a harmless goose landing in an agricultural dome causes the robots to absolutely crash out and go to war against any trace of wildlife. Yeah, unfortunately, it just seems that all of the progress towards reintegration of animals and aliens and myths and monsters has just been completely lost in this distant future. Honestly, all of the invasions from aliens might have had something to do with that, causing humans to build walled-off cities to isolate themselves. And though many animals were able to learn human speech over the millennia, humans just never did the same for their animal companions. Until now. Yeah, the Wild Robot leaves our universe off on a hopeful note, with Roz cracking the code and learning to speak with the animals in their animal language. And with that, she can be the bridge between animal and humankind, hopefully kindling a brighter future. So, there you go. That's the DreamWorks theory so far. Again, I am just so proud of the amazing team of writers, researchers, and editors that helped me put together this massive project, sinking hundreds of hours into figuring out how to connect all of these movies. This was some of the most fun I've ever had with a theory, and I absolutely want to do more of these timelines. We've already done Disney, and Pixar seems like pretty well-trodden ground, but is there another series that you want us to cover? Like, I'm thinking about doing something covering every Marvel animated or cinematic thing ever released in the lead up to Doomsday. But if you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, remember that it's all just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Up next on Film Theory.
What if every Disney movie took place on the same timeline?